20th of April, 1945. A swath of bombers is approaching southern Germany. The bombers' mission objectives are industrial and production facilities in the Munich area. Fortunately, this attack is pure fiction. However, a fiction which almost became reality. In 1944, the Wehrmacht is in retreat on all fronts. The war has also reached the frontiers of the homeland. Bombers of the British RAF Bomber Command and of the United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe penetrate into the German Reich's airspace day to day. The glory of the German Luftwaffe fades. The battle for the homeland is forcing the Luftwaffe to extremes. Attack the enemy without regard to losses. This is the Luftwaffe's order. The 8th U.S. AAF itself loses more than 10,000 airplanes over Europe, but due to the industrial capacity and human resources of the Allies, they are able to compensate for their losses relatively quickly. The German Reich is not able to keep up to this material competition for very long. Little by little, the ranks of the fighter races are thinning. For the most part, freshmen are thrown into combat over hastily, and thus for very many young pilots, their first mission at the same time becomes their last. While the sovereignty of the airspace passes over to the Allies more and more, the Germans begin to search for new and unconventional solutions. Guided missiles and so-called expendable fighters, which are cheap in production, are meant to bring about a turning point in the war. Werner von Braun, one of the most adept engineers in the field of rocket science, is developing a missile by the code name Waterfall. By means of this rocket, the high-flying bombers of the Allies are to be antagonized effectively. In effect, the testing of the first prototypes at the research center in Peenemünde is quite a success. But there remains problems to control the missile when it is out of sight. Out of the premise of an automatic anti-aircraft missile, the idea of a semi-automatic manned rocket is now brought to see the light of day. In this stage of development, there happens to be an exchange of ideas with an until then rather nondescript developer in the German program for aviation armaments. His name is Erich Bachem. Being a native of the town Mulheim an der Ruhr, he is already an enthusiastic pilot of glider planes during his years of study. He receives an apprenticeship as a master craftsman in the design and construction of aircrafts and advances to be the director of the developmental department at the Fiesler aircraft manufacturer. Yet before the war, he designs projects there, which are far ahead of their time. In 1942, he establishes the Bachem Work GmbH in the Schwaben town Waldsee. By means of his expert knowledge in the manufacturing of wooden aircraft parts, he is now acting as a component supplier for the German aviation industry. Just like Wernher von Braun, Erich Bachem is also dreaming about the manned flight into space, which is not so far away anymore. But now at this time there is war, and weapons have to be produced. When in the summer of 1944, a densely consolidated swarm of Allied bombers passed through unopposed by the German air raid defense and was then flying over Bachem's main production facility, the engineer comes to an ingenious idea. By means of a rocket-propelled interceptor, the fighter defense shall be broken through at lightning speed in order to hit the formations of bombers devastatingly. In just a few weeks, the engineer succeeds in designing a pre-investment study of an interceptor plane. He calls this design Barock, which is a token for manned rocket in German. For relaxation, Bachem reads Shakespeare, for education does not know the ideological limits of a worldview. In a text passage of Julius Caesar, he reads, "It's the warm day that begets the Natter." Henceforth, the project has had a name. Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsfuhrer SS, regards the Natter as a suitable weapon for his very own personal purposes. Because the armed formations of the SS and the so-called Waffen-SS do not have their own air forces at their command, Himmler dreams of a distinct air force for the SS, namely Flieger SS. The project is taken into the so-called Emergency Fighter Program by the token 8-349. On the 18th of September in 1944, the official notice of award reaches Erich Bachem. Gruppenführer Hans Kammler is entrusted with the deployment of a development and construction commando for the Natter. By means of his talent in organizational matters of previous projects, such as the Mittelbau Dora, a subsurface construction facility for the V-2 rocket, Kammler is regarded as the perfect technocrat for this project. Erich Bachem is not a convinced National Socialist. Like every other German industrialist, he is obliged to become a member of the NSDAP to be allowed to perform his business. Because his company does not possess enough personnel, the engineer has no other choice than to arrange himself, but not at all costs. An offer on the part of the SS to deploy personnel from concentration camps is categorically refused by him. With malnourished and unqualified personnel, he won't be able to work productively. Particularly for the Natter, the Special Command 600N is established, which is a group of construction specialists that is made up of engineers who have been slightly wounded in combat from the ranks of the SS. By means of this additional personnel, Obersturmführer Heinz Flessner supports the Bachem crew in Waldsee. Erich Bachem defines the interpretation of the project as far as possible. A staff consisting of almost 80 engineers supports him in the process. At this juncture, Henry Franz Bethbader manages to achieve an exceptional career. The talented engineer advances to the position of chief designer and leader of the project, even though Bethbader is a Dutch citizen, a curiosity in a top-secret project of the Third Reich. Bachem develops the Natter according to strict criteria: smallest possible dimensions, takeoff and landing without airfield, rapid climb flight, as well as easy operation for mass deployment on condition of the most minimal expenditure possible in manufacturing. But such a radical project puts the engineers before massive problems. A flight position in recumbency or while kneeling fails due to the rapid fatigue of the pilot. Indeed, rope start tests using a cable system are generally possible, but what to do with the exhaust gases? The liquid propellant engine, which is used with the Messerschmitt 163 interceptor, is not sufficient for vertical takeoff, and thus an auxiliary power engine is required. Because extreme speeds of more than 200 meters per second are expected, an automatic control as well as the three-dimensional gyroscopic compass become necessary. However, these components have yet to be developed. Because the deployable radius at service ceiling only amounts to 5 miles, Bachem creates specifically for the Natter-developed operation concept to use it as a so-called Objekt-Schutzjäger, an interceptor designed to protect important industrial centers. Radar units, which locate and monitor the enemy formation, are responsible for the picking up of the bomber group. After an air raid warning is triggered, the pilots betake themselves to the missilery and prepare for takeoff. The Natter missile is then arranged towards the bomber command's entry lane by ground personnel and launched upon the bombers flying over. With a maximum climb rate of 220 meters per second, 10 times faster than any Allied fighter, the pilot shoots into the sky. For comparison, a modern F-16 reaches almost 250 meters per second. Merely 60 seconds of flight time are necessary to reach the bomber formations. In the process, the bomber group changes of course are transmitted to the Natter's automatic control system by a ground control station, and the Natter is thereby automatically readjusted without the pilot's help. Once on height, the pilot deactivates the Natter's onboard automatic control and begins to manually approach the target. Due to the excessive speed of the Natter, the attack on the bombers is preferably taking place from behind them. In range of 500 meters, fire is opened on the target. After firing, the fighter eludes the enemy defense through nosediving and is heading for the direction of the drop zone. After about 2 minutes and 30 seconds, the fuel is consumed and the missile switches over to gliding flight. Because a landing is not intended, the pilot initiates rescue proceedings at about 3,000 meters altitude. The rescue of the pilot is an important element of the concept because the Natter is not a suicide machine. However, due to the high speed and the narrow cockpit, a conventional exit can hardly be imagined. At first, one tries to reduce the speed during a nosedive to 280 kilometers per hour with the help of stubby wings. To initiate his ejection, the pilot releases the bow section from the rest of the fuselage. At the same time, the recovery parachute in the tail is activated. The expulsion occurs in reefed condition in order not to abruptly transmit braking forces to the pilot and the airframe. By means of a novel parachute made of straps, which merely consists of length and crosswise assembled straps, enough pent-up air can pass off without reducing the braking efficiency too much. After having unfastened himself, the pilot is held inside the airplane due to the prevailing dynamic pressure. Only after the parachute is completely unreefed and the airframe goes into vertical position, the pilot is able to come clear from the aircraft. Jet engine and pilot thus become available for further missions. Regarding the armament, one considers the use of 2 conventional cannons of the type Mk108. The 30mm cannon, which is developed by Rheinmetall Borzig, proves to be very effective in combat against heavy bombers. But the expenditure in manufacturing is too high for a lost device in the airplane's bow. The Special Equipment Device SG-119, which is a tubular battery consisting of 32 barrels of the Mk108, whose projectiles are comparable with the principle of a shotgun, proves also to be problematic. Even while the development of the Natter runs at full speed, the leadership in Berlin is making ambitious plans. By means of the testing plan Operation Munich, the numbers of prototypes for air towing, gliding, and unmanned vertical start tests are limited to a number of 25, a risky business. At Nürnberg an der Donau, the DFS, the German Research Institute of Gliding Flight, conducts the first gliding flight tests in November of 1944. The non-propelled prototypes are air-towed by an airplane to test heights for the purpose and then experimented with. One intends to gain insights about flight characteristics and about limits and functionality of the complex prefabricated parts before the actual taking place of vertical starts. The great potential of the small Natter is immediately recognized. During free flight, test pilot Zubit reaches a velocity of 370 miles per hour in spite of the small, stubby wings with flight characteristics that are similar to that of a glider. As a testing ground for vertical start experiments, the military training area Heuberg at Stetten am kalten Markt in Württemberg is selected. The choice is ideal. The 5,000-hectare area is merely 30 miles away from the Waldsee. The Test Command N, led by Luftwaffe Captain Berninger, is deployed there. At the Heuberg, a somewhat isolated area by the name of Ochsenkopf is to be found. Here the actual test ground comes into existence. A simple steel framework of approximately 75 feet is assembled on a concrete platform. The slideway, which was officially developed by the Urslinger machine factory under the name of Big Experimental Mounting, is bedded centrally on a rotating assembly and fully traversable. To pull the Natter by means of a mounting crane to the desired starting height, a tilting by 70 degrees becomes necessary. The SS monitors every working stage and seals the Natter off from the outside world. Everyone involved is ordered to strict secrecy. Violators are threatened with court-martial and death by shooting. By the end of November 1944, the official project description of the Natter appears. All relevant specifications for the industrial manufacturing process are taken from there. The manned missile is manufactured mostly of plywood, preferably pine or common spruce. The fuselage is made up of 19 frames which are covered by 2 to 3 millimeter thick plywood for aircraft manufacturing. The wooden parts are made simply to such an extent that every furniture factory in the Reich is able to produce them. The individual parts are merely fixed by urea resin glue and by nailing. The construction effort for a Natter thus amounts merely to 1/50th compared to a conventional fighter airplane.
Because at the time aluminum was scarce goods, it was decided to resort to the more common material, wood. This is an original rib of the Natter, which is made out of 9 layers of 5 millimeter thick pine wood, firmly glued together. Pine is very light and has the required flexibility to optimally absorb the power generated during the rocket launch.
The liquid propellant engine 109-509A-1, which was developed by the Helmut Walther Company, serves as a cruise engine. With its 4,000 horsepower, its small dimensions, and a weight of only 170 kilograms, it is virtually made for the application in the Natter. The propulsion utilizes 2 propellants, an oxidizer and a fuel by the German code names of T-Stoff and C-Stoff. T-Stoff is an 80% solution of hydrogen peroxide, while C-Stoff is a combination of methanol, hydrazine hydrate, water, and catalyst 431. Together they form a hypergolic mixture of more than 140 gallons inside the Natter. Booster rockets, type SG-35 from Schmidding factory, are used as accessory drive for takeoff and unfold a push each with 1,200 horsepower for the duration of 12 seconds combustion time. The success of breaking up bomber formations by means of unguided air-to-air missiles lead to a radical rethinking of the Natter's armament. The Eberspacher company in Esslingen am Neckar is instructed with the engineering of a honeycomb launching frame made of sectional steel. For manufacturing, these 6-edged honeycombs made of steel sheet are extremely low-priced and low-weight for the housing of rocket ammunition. The RZ-73 rocket, codenamed Chinook, is chosen as a feasible weapon. The spin-stabilized missile contains enough explosive substance to ensure the shooting down of a bomber by means of 1 or 2 hits at the target. Quite early, it is considered to decentralize production to multiple locations. At the same time, Erich Bachem remembers his former classmate Wolf Hirth, who manufactures wooden tail units and aerofoils for Messerschmitt in the village Nabern near the town Kirchheim Tech.
In October 1945, I passed the exam to officially build aircrafts. In November, Wolf Hirth came to me and told me that I had been picked to join the test group selected to build the secret aircraft called Natter. No one knew what it was, only that it was crucial to the war effort and very urgent.
On December the 22nd in 1944, it is finally done. The prototype M16 is tested by vertical start. Because various tests of individual components are yet to take place, vertical starts are performed unmanned for the time being and only by the use of the accessory booster rockets. Erich Bachem and Franz Bethbetter arrive at the Ochsenkopf to have their own impression of the testing procedure. A fascinating view unfolds to them. The rocket-like projectile appears to be almost utopian and is reminiscent of the early movies about the conquest of space. By means of a remote camera, the first successful vertical start is documented in an image sequence. As intended, the disassembly of the fuselage cell occurs at the height of 9,000 feet.
Ja! Sie fliegt! Es funktioniert! Ja, Franz, es ist nicht wundervoll. Ganz großartig, Herr Bachem.
The attendees congratulate themselves rife with pride to have reached something new and special in the history of aviation. The next year is expected with confidence. But the year of 1945 begins with a catastrophe. In the early mornings of January the 1st in 1945, several fighter squadrons and dive bomber wings of the Luftwaffe perform a keen attack on Allied airfields alongside the Western Front. The so-called Operation Bodenplatte proves to be an enormous surprise for the Allies. Almost 500 airplanes on ground and in the air are either destroyed or damaged, but the mission has far more serious consequences for the Luftwaffe. In this way, the German squadrons lose 184 airplanes through friendly fire on their return flight, 2/3 of the total German casualties during this mission. The Luftwaffe is never to recover from the loss of more than 200 experienced aviators and formation leaders on a single day. Meanwhile, the experiments at Heuberg continue. There, setbacks are to be coped with too. The automatic triggering of the recovery parachute and of the accessory booster rockets for takeoff assistance do not work faultlessly and cause irreparable damages or destruction on the wooden fuselages. Nevertheless, it is possible to increasingly achieve better safety in the handling of the missile. In light of the devastating war situation, the leadership is pressing for a deployment under combat conditions as fast as possible. With 10 machines, the military intervention is supposed to happen in the area of Stuttgart on March the 20th, 1945. As in the month the crocuses blossom, the undertaking is called after the name of this Iridacea without further ado. As place of action, an inconspicuous piece of wood next to Kirchheim Tech, near the Autobahn Stuttgart-Munich, has been chosen. The choice is not random. On the target approach to South Germany, the Autobahn is an important means of navigation for the Allied pilots. As the factory, Wolfhurt now produces deployable exemplars. The decision to choose deployment near the production site is apparent. In the beginning of 1945, the building company Most gets the order of producing concrete fundaments in the forest area Hassenholz. Firstly, a new starting mount is installed. For the so-called Zündstagen Lafette, the concrete platform possesses a notch in the middle for the approximately 45 feet long trunk with guideline rails. This way, a facility comes up consisting of 3 launching ramps which nearly form an equilateral triangle having an edge length of 360 feet. In the intersection of the array, the Natter's deployment is to be conducted by a mobile headquarters. The more and more noticeable lack of fuel forces the mass of the German Luftwaffe to remain on the ground doing nothing. Whole squadrons become disbanded or rearranged.
So, meine Herren, das
When the front closes, flying personnel being in retaining are re-skilled to infantrymen without further ado. A somewhat inglorious ending for the Hawks of the Air. On an airbase in northern Germany, a small group of chosen ones is destined to something higher.
Hervorragend. Immer während der Ausbildung. Typisch Luftwaffe. Wegtreten! Achtung!
Captain Karls, squadron commander, has received a secret order: the selection of volunteers for scheduled test of the Natter under combat conditions. After instruction of the pilots for Operation Crocus took place in the RLM, the Third Reich's Ministry of Aviation, the officer and the 8 pilots get on their way to South Germany, where they are to be trained for the task to come. When, on the 25th of February 1945, the combination of liquid propellant engine and booster rockets is successfully tested in a vertical start, the regime's decision is firm: manned launch is to be executed immediately. A pilot is already found. His name is Lothar Sieber. Being only 22 years old, he yet has had an adventurous life of an aviator by that time. In 1940, Sieber, who is from Dresden, starts his apprenticeship as an airman with the Luftwaffe. Soon it is plain to see he possesses extraordinary skills of piloting aircrafts. For the young pilot, a glorious career seems to be in the cards. However, dark shadows are harbingers of perdition. Having dismissed a comrade, Sieber oversleeps his guarding shift and is sentenced by court-martial in the spring of 1943. The demotion to a simple airman is a heavy burden on the skilled pilot. Thanks to his special flying skills, Sieber finds his way to a special unit of the Luftwaffe and flies special missions using machines of prey to support agents and sabotage troops behind enemy lines. His abilities and his courage respectfully yield him the nickname Aviator of Death. With the battle squadron, he selflessly frees 23 trapped comrades, putting his own life at stake. For his achievement, he receives the Iron Cross.
Weiter so, Flieger Sieber. Deutschland braucht Piloten wie Sie. Jawohl, Major.
As a test pilot, Sieber gets to Waldsee in December 1944. He familiarizes with the Natter's technical details and is confident concerning a manned test. Even when the prototype M33 gets destroyed by an explosion of a booster rocket before his eyes, he is positive about being able to fly it. The SS submits Sieber the offer of promoting him back to officer under the condition of a successful start. His fiancée, Gertrude Natter, tries to talk him out of all that. Even Erich Bachem makes reservations, yet Lothar Sieber volunteers. In the evening before the start, he makes a will. Thursday, March 1st, 1945. Denslow Stratus is over the Opsenkopf. The prototype M23 is prepared for the world's first manned rocket launch. Therefore, it is equipped with the necessary flight and measuring instruments. But the gyro compass is still missing. A fatal mistake, as it will prove. With Erich Bachem, Lothar Sieber once again goes through the starting procedure.
Lothar,
The constructor gives some advice to the young pilot until it is finally time.
Leiten Sie sofort eine kurze Drehung ein. Die Natter wird dann wieder in die Normallage steuern.
Herr Bachem, die Natter ist soweit.
So, Lothar. Halt die Beine.
Schöner Bach. Bis später.
Sieber goes to the starting platform. He enters the iron stairs and moves hand over hand into the narrow cockpit of the 2.5 tons heavy machine. When the hub closes over him, there is no going back. Sieber prepares for launch. At about 17:45 hour, history is written on the Heuberg. Sieber activates the Walther engine and starts it up. The ground crew ignites the booster rockets, and in a cloud of fire and dust, the almost 7,000 horsepower push the machine out of its starting ramp. Constantly gaining altitude, Sieber soars into the sky. Booster rockets disengage and reel back to Earth. The machine turns into a slight supine position. Suddenly, something breaks free from the hull. The cabin hatch has been lost. The ground personnel is horrified. Lothar Sieber turns the M23 in its normal position with a half turn. The Natter ascends further to disappear in the clouds in an altitude of 4,500 feet. Only the engine's boom is left to be heard. Few moments later, the Natter reappears remotely. The missile plummets out of the clouds and shatters in a crash near the edge of a forest. Lothar Siebert's last flight only took 55 seconds.
Wir waren damals noch junge Kerle.
We were boys then, just playing a game of soccer, when we heard a startling loud bang in the sky. Looking up, we saw Lothar Sieber's machine flying over Nusplingen at a supersonic speed, headed towards Haarhof, where it crashed. You can still see the scars on the old trees, which were much smaller back then. When we got to the crash site, we discovered a giant crater. The diameter was over 10 meters and the depth about 2 meters. It was not possible to identify anything of the machine itself, only a few miniature glowing pieces of iron.
The death register states as a cause of death heart and breath paralysis, exodus by combination while crashing. On March 3rd, there is a funeral in which the few leftovers are buried. In his funeral speech, Captain Berninger honors the achievements of Sieber.
Dieser Pioniertag sollten wir uns immer erinnern.
Especially Erich Bachem is concerned by Sieber's demise. For the rest of his life, he will blame himself for the death of the young pilot. The SS has an exact idea what happened on this flight. A delay in timing regarding revision of construction is unbearable due to war situation. In an official letter, Berlin is told the accident was just because of flawed sealing of the cover. But is this really the true reason? The answer will be learned only 50 years later. The pilots under command of Captain Karls are told nothing about the unsuccessful flight. For them, the training goes on. In particular, they concentrate on parachute jumps. As they were all proven pilots, volplanes with the few prototypes are renounced, and they are merely theoretically instructed in the flight and mission-specific features of this concept. Soon they are to receive their last movement order. Meanwhile, at the production site, one works feverishly to meet the date of deployment. The deadline for Operation Crocus cannot be met anymore, so it is postponed to the 20th of April 1945, the Führer's birthday. According to the season, it is named to Ascension. Additionally, the shipment of material is sensitively impaired by the systematic destruction of railway from the air. For more and more work now, women are installed as their men get their draft to the front. For safety reasons, it is mostly only produced at night. What the bombers spare, the hedgehoppers satirize. Vehicles, horse and cart, even single bikers are shot at by the fighter bombers. To test functionality of the weapons array on the 2nd of April 1945, the last big chapter of vertical start experiments takes place. Proving of the M52, the first combat unit, is executed with complete weaponry consisting of 24 foam rockets, however unmanned. Merely a leather puppet takes the pilot's seat. After start, the weapons are triggered automatically by a timer. All the other procedures go as planned. The production version seems ready. In the early days of April 1945, Captain Karls receives the order to transfer to Stuttgart. With a small crew, he takes quarters in Holzmatten. The starting platforms are in the immediate proximity. Regarding the troops' order, they do not tell the inhabitants anything. Eagerly, the aircraft's arrival is awaited.
Die Amerikaner können nicht mehr weit sein. Und, Hoffenmeier, der Stabsfeldwebel soll die Nachricht umgehend nach Berlin weitersenden.
Jawohl, Hauptmann.
Wir brauchen dringend Nachricht, wo unsere Einsatzmaschinen bleiben.
Jawohl.
Frank, nicht vom Heldenklau wischen lassen. Na dann, Hals und Bein.
While the officer is tortured by uncertainty, the doughboys enjoy the silence before the storm. One keeps fit with sports and enjoys the tepid spring weather. But things turn out differently. In the south of Germany, American and French forces unstoppably fight their way to the outer regions of Stuttgart. Parts of the 7th U.S. Army closed the ring around this important industrial center near Kirchheim. On April 20th, Captain Karls has to make the hard decision to abscond with his troops. Until last, they wait for the assigned machines. The planned military intervention was thereby thwarted. The Natter's end seems to have come. The starting facility and Wolfhirth factory are under control of Americans. The proving of Ochsenkopf is ceased. On April 21st, Waldsee is seized by forces of the 1st French Army. Meanwhile, a small group with a handful of combat units, under the command of Obersturmführer Flessner and Franz Bethbader, is underway to Austria. One wants to continue the war in the so-called Alpenfestung, a propaganda fortress and national redoubt of the Nazis. The goal is finally reached when the convoy arrived at the Pitz Valley in Austria. There, a new production site for the Natter is supposed to be built, but the Allies prevent these plans from becoming reality. With the Americans approaching, the detachment decides not to destroy the precious cargo. So, on a meadow in St. Leohard, U.S. troops loot 4 almost finished patterns of the mission. Yet the developers fought for the project's existence. Hans Baer, a manufacturer of cigarette paper, submits an unusual offer to the Americans: resumption of the Natter production. This is not about thwarting the inevitable collapse of the Third Reich, but about the actual will of every technocrat to complete his project successfully. Hans Kammler escapes the Allies in his own way. In a piece of woodlands near Prague, he commits suicide. Heinrich Himmler is to follow suit later. Thus, the race for the Natter series maturely ends. Truly to the bitter end, the staff of Erich Bachem works on establishing the Natter for an efficient mission concept. With the help of a rocket steering paddle near the engine beam, stability problems can be controlled during start. As merely a lower limit of 30 feet is necessary for a vertical start, the idea of a mobile launching ramp is taken up. This method not only would have made preparations for start easier, but also the Natter self-sustaining, deployable from any place. As the Allies are eager to use German war technology for their own interest after the war ends, looted technology is mutually exchanged. The Soviets are offered an intact Natter for documents of other experimental aircrafts. Another prototype goes to the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough, England. The Americans are ordered to relocate one seized plane to the USA for experimental studies. This way, the remaining Natter exemplars get to the Foreign Aircraft Evaluation Center on Freeman Field in Indiana. Every prototype receives a prey signature. Number 1, formerly M58, is exhibited to public and high-ranking military men at diverse events. To become more impressive, the Natter subsequently is furnished with a swastika painted on it. In July 1946, on the Edward Air Force Base, a vertical start is executed with the former M25, but the American remote control fails, causing the machine to crash. Hence, Number 1 gets to the National Air and Space Museum in Silver Hill, Maryland. There it is stored until further notice. Today, the remaining looted machines' whereabouts cannot be clarified. Thus, out of approximately 40 produced Natter pieces, this is the only well-preserved original pattern. German engineers are very demanded by victorious powers when it comes to high technology. Werner von Braun is able to continue his career as representative director of NASA in the United States. Erich Bachem, on the other side, has his own plans. In 1946, in WWII, he founds the business called ERIBA, an engineering office for applied technology. He develops furniture, child's pushchairs, and even tenements. When, with the beginning of the Berlin blockage, tensions between East and West become visible, he goes to South America with his family and devotes himself to the production of guitars and fiddles. In the year 1952, he returns to Germany and builds trailers in cooperation with the company Heimer Trailer. The therein used nutrient is wood. The Natter is past. Only in lectures, at air and space travel conventions, he talks once again about his former project. Erich Bachem dies on the 25th of March in the year 1960 of a kidney disease, aged just 53 years, in Mulheim an der Ruhr. As after the war, Germany lacks of everything. Available war material is dismantled and used otherwise. Residuals of the Natter production, too. Frames are sold and processed further. The allegedly at WWII Town Lake sunk Walter engines, when the war ended, have to be salvaged. Several dives have failed up to date. Yet not everything is lost.
In December 1944, I was working for the Field Measurement Office in Kirchheim, surveying for the Reichsautobahn construction Stuttgart-Ulm. That's when I stumbled upon these platforms. It was said that they were probably made for the V1 or the V2. Later, it came out that these platforms were actually built as launch pads for the Natter.
But Willy Reichert is one of a few who is interested in the project Natter. The happenings around the Natter stay mostly undisturbed for half a century. A career soldier from Stetten am kalten Markt revives the long-forgotten secret weapon. His name, Manfred Hensel. Beginning in the 70s, the co-founder of the Military Historic Association of Stetten has been researching all aspects of the Natter. There is a sensational discovery in 1998. At the crash site of the M23, digs are carried out successfully. Hence, supposedly, long-lost fragments come to the light. Nowadays, they belong next to a reenacted scene with Lothar Sieber and Erich Bachem to the basics of about the story of a military training area in Heuberg.
The Natter is a supporting element in the 100 years of Heuberg training area military history. The replica of the Natter in the Military Historical Collection enjoys huge popularity, even within Europe. Through this, we can see the visitors acknowledge that with his flight, Lothar Sieber wrote a part of aeronautic and aerospace engineering history.
Near the former launching ramps of Lothar Sieber and the Natter's trial. March 1945, and a stylized Natter remind in a simple way of the happenings that took place there 65 years ago. Still, the spirit of the Natter lives on. Apart from a partial reconstruction by using original parts as it can be seen in the German Museum in Munich, there is a handful of museums, as for example, the Luftwaffe Museum in Berlin-Gatow or the Plains of Fame Museum in Chino, California, which have respectable Natter replicas. An interest group of engineers from Germany wants to know it very precisely. Project 349, the original reconstruction of a Natter which is able to fly, is presumably the only attempt to getting a hint for the Natter's last secrets. Once more, there is the question why exactly this little plane makes so many technologically interested persons want to rebuild it.
What fascinates about this project is the simple wood construction used when constructing gliders, connected with the then highly modern propulsion technology, the rocket engine. Additionally, the Natter also united other highly modern elements within itself. For example, the air-to-air missiles, which helped enable this project to sustain a certain fascination even today. With this, the Natter also holds many technological secrets, and in order to discover these, you have to reconstruct it like an experimental archaeologist.
What truly is the Natter? Is it merely a primitively wood construction with rocket engine? Maybe it is at first glance, but concerning the conditions at the time, one can evaluate this draft as a remarkable performance. The principle of reusing partial segments in the Natter is firstly applied in a plane. Thus, it also is the first flying apparatus with separation of bow and rear and using a belt parachute to salvage crucial components. The combination of liquid and solid-fueled engines sets new dimensions absolutely. This is also the first flying object which has thrusters for steering as well as pitch elevators and ailerons coming into effect in the same cross control. Using radar for target approach is trend-setting and turns this little interceptor into an ideal for many more projects of air traveling history. After the war, a lot of knowledge about the Natter is considered in rocketry and space travel. The Natter is just one of many projects that have led to mankind exploring space, but it has a special status. As a rocket-propelled projectile developed for taking off from a firm place vertically, it is the connection element between rocket and manned flying object. The basis for manned space travel broke new grounds with it.